Welcome back to part 2 of this crazy story. So in our first video, we went over the day of the accident from my perspective and your perspective.
Yeah.
So what these lovely people don't know, unless they've read my blog, is that this story gets weirder. Doesn't it?
That's one way to put it, yeah.
I think it was about 2-ish weeks
14, 17 days, somewhere around there, yeah.
of being in the ICU. I was even extubated. They pulled my breathing tube out, which I remember.
You had your swallow test.
Well, and I remember when that tube came out, it was nasty. Like, it had this goopy brown stuff. Ugh, so gross.
And there's a whole hilarious story to be told one day about her swallow test. Our good, loving friend Stacy knows this story. She's giggling like crazy right now. We're going to have her help us tell that story. But
what story?
We'll deal with that later.
Do I know?
Yeah. You don't remember it, but yeah, you know.
So you've told it to me before?
Oh yeah, Stacy and I both have. That poor girl. You wore her skin for about 10 minutes. It was hilarious. It's terrible, but it's funny.
Did I chew somebody out?
Oh, it was so bad.
Did they deserve it?
No. The girl who came in prior to her, the respiratory therapist, failed to do her job correctly in waking her up, and this poor lady walked in and thought you were already awake. Says, "Here, swallow this," and bless her heart. And then the girl that actually caused the problem stood out there and said, "Well, that's just," and then Stacy proceeded to correct her righteously. But oh, that poor girl, she did not deserve that.
I don't know who you are. I don't know your name. Stacy probably knows. On the off chance you ever see this video, I'm truly sorry for reading you the riot act. So, back to the point of this video. What makes my case even more crazy, not only did I have the AOD, the internal decapitation, and you know, on our last video we didn't even list all of my other injuries. Should we call those out? Does it matter?
If people want to know about that, they can ask you because they're extensive.
Okay, I had a lot of other
That's
injuries.
Almost a video in itself.
Yeah, so. I mean, like pages worth of injuries. So I was extubated, breathing on my own, and I remember that feeling. It was very scary. I remember it being, breathing is a passive thing for us normally, and when it's not passive, it's quite, when you're having to think about the breaths that you take, it's quite scary. Sometime after I was extubated, I developed a headache. I don't know, this is mostly his area because he remembers it more than I do, but I developed a headache.
4 to 7 days, give or take. It wasn't rapid, it wasn't sudden, but it sometime in the first 4 to 7 days it developed,
and then it got
progressively
worse
yes.
and worse and worse, and then I started vomiting a lot. But the headache and the vomiting could easily be explained by a myriad of other issues.
The most of which everyone thought was you were in a halo.
Right.
Which creates a feeling of weightlessness and falling. And you take someone who already has a history of vertigo, so it was more or less just dismissed, and that's why you were getting 4 to 6 doses of Zofran a day, because it made sense why you felt that way. The headache, not necessarily, but why you were dizzy and throwing up, it made sense.
And might I add, throwing up in a halo is a horrific experience for everybody involved. This poor guy right here, he says it wasn't as violent as I remember, but I vividly remember before I would get sick, he would grab the hardware.
The back, not the head, the back.
But you have to remember, this halo is screwed into my skull, and he's grabbing me and the halo and slinging me up so that I could throw up.
But do you grasp the concept? This halo is a vest that goes all the way over you, front and back. If you vomit inside that, that's not something that your nurse can take off and bathe and clean and put it back on. It's permanent as long as it's on there. So if you vomit inside that vest, that's where we are.
Did I get a lot in there?
Not while I was present, but by the 6th week, we could smell your halo from the hallway. And unfortunately, that needs to be known because that was part of it. Your dad knew it and he struggled with it, but a lot of us did. But I did the best I could.
You struggled with because I stunk so bad?
Yes, we could smell you from the hallway because there was vomit inside your halo.
I don't know if that's going to make the cut.
Well, it may not, but it is pertinent because that was a big part, not only for you but for me. And I want people to know that there's a reason why I would grab that bar behind your back and set you up so violently and hold that thing, because anything that got in there stayed in there until that thing came off.
Yeah.
And we had no end date for that to come off.
Right. So back to the story with the headache and the vomiting. The only thing that I remember is the severe headache, worst headache of my life, and I could not get any relief. When
your trauma doc rounded, I said, look, we are approaching 2 weeks post-op, and we have a building, growing, crushing headache. This is not normal. I think we need to see your neurosurgeon, Dr. Guzzi. And she said, no, we're not going to do that. Why not? Well, we're not going to do that. I said, okay. So she orders more pain meds for you. That is, give or take 8 a.m. We're rounding 10:30 to 11 o'clock, and you have a nurse and a nurse doing orientation, and they're still piling ice packs in the top of your halo, and it's time for your next dose of morphine. And she comes in and she gives it to you properly. I mean, she's slow pushing on. And you're looking at me and you're not making sense, but you're looking at me, and then you close your eyes, and I keep trying to talk to you, you won't talk to me, you won't make sense. And then we start noticing that your sats are dropping. You go from 92 to mid 80s.
My oxygen saturation.
Upper 70s, low 70s. Now we're in the 60s, and I was like, hey, something's not right. And we hit 60s, and then we go low 60s, and then we go upper 50s. And I said, all right, damn it, it's time to do something. Something's not right. And they're looking at each other, and they look at me, and I remember seeing 48. And I said, all right, damn it, I've stayed in my lane for as long as I've been here, but now I know what's going on here, and this has to stop. You are going to get me a dose of a dose of Narcan and a doctor right now. And she looked at me, and she looked at the other nurse, and she looked back at me, and I said, now. And she took off out of the room. And I looked at the other girl, and I said, that BBM right there, you need to bag her. And she grabbed it, and She put it on your face, and she did her thing for a time or two, and I reached to take it away from her and do it correctly, and
But at that point, I had quit
you
breathing, right?
you were looking at me, and you went totally at me. You stopped breathing, looking at me. Your nose, your lips turned purple. Your fingernail, your hands started turning purple. You stopped breathing. So I started to take the BVM away from her and looked up, and the other nurse came through with a syringe in her hand and a trail of doctors behind her. And
So did she actually bring Narcan?
she did, but that was not the problem. It made sense that was the problem, but that was not the problem. You didn't stop breathing because of the recent dose of morphine. You stopped breathing because of the hydrocephalus. We found out 45 minutes later. Your sister showed up. We sat there and talked and cried and did our thing. And I was asked to leave, and I told them no, I wasn't leaving. If you look around, I might be the calmest person in this room. And then we started hearing them talking about, I don't remember if they said left or right, but they said you had blown a pupil and they were non-reactive. And Brittany and I both knew what was going on there. So Brittany left the room and I followed her, and we sat out there until they rolled you out and down to surgery. And that's how
they did this. They criked me.
Bedside.
Yeah, they criked me in the room.
They were actually doing that when Brittany and I were leaving. And then for the next 3 hours we sat and waited.
And then it gets even worse for me.
For her. But
yeah,
that was the longest 6 hours of my life.
Yeah. For me, if you've read my blog, it probably makes much more sense to read it than I can talk about it. But I woke up in the OR and I could hear people moving around, and I could hear like the sounds of like I don't know how to explain
Tools.
it. Like the sound of like metal tools. I just remember that sound distinctly. And I could hear everything they were saying, but I didn't know what was going on, and I couldn't move, and I couldn't talk. I was awake, in pain, terrified, and unable to let anybody know that I was here. And I started thinking, if I can just like wiggle a finger, then they'll know that I'm here, and they'll do something, they'll stop. Because now in hindsight, what must have happened was they put the shunt in, the EVD in, it's a drain in your brain. And so when they put that in, it reversed the hydrocephalus. It started to drain my CSF. And so I woke up, but I was paralyzed and couldn't communicate, could not tell anybody that, hey, I'm alive, I can hear you, I can feel this, So I thought, if I can wiggle a finger, then they'll know that I'm back and they'll stop. And so I put forth every ounce of strength I had in me to wiggle a finger. And I did. I wiggled my finger. And I remember hearing a female voice say she's wiggling her finger.
You told me about that the next day.
But they just kept going. They just kept doing what they were doing, which was obviously saving my life. And so my brain in that moment said, okay, well, that didn't work, so I'm just gonna die now. And it's like I put forth all of my energy to wiggle my finger, so all of that strength it took to move my finger, I put into willing myself to die. It was a very calculated and mathematical thought. You know, plan A failed, so now I'm going to do plan B, and plan B is I'm done, I'm checking out, I'm not going to do this anymore. And so that's what I did. I was manifesting myself to die. Obviously, I failed, but even when that was over, I wasn't able to tell anybody what had happened until the next day. And so
with a trach, you can't talk. All you can do is write when you're offhand.
Yeah, I had a trach, and I couldn't communicate with anybody, so I could not tell anybody what I had just experienced. And so when I came back, I don't think I've ever asked you this either. When I came back, or when you got to see me, could you tell that something, like, was I giving any indication that I'm not okay?
No, you were wild-eyed and you want to know what happened. The only thing you would draw, there again, right-handed, was a big question mark. What happened? What happened? And I don't know if it was meds, hypoxia, or what, but you weren't processing what happened. So I would tell you, and I get the big question mark. And I would tell you again, and I get the big question mark. And
you never told me that.
Yeah, I did.
No short-term memory.
Unfortunately, yes, I did. And we did that for 3 days. And
oh, really?
Yeah. Slowly, you began to tell me what you remember and what had happened.
So it was days before I could communicate to somebody.
3 days. So, and then slowly you started telling me, and as bad as all this was, the worst thing you told me in the whole thing, the part that I possibly have the most problem with, aside from what happened to you, was you heard them drill the hole in your skull to place the drain to release the pressure. You were awake, you remember you heard them drill a hole in the top of your skull. And
I couldn't tell anybody.
I can only imagine what that was like.
Yeah.
And when you did wake up, you wanted to tell me about that, and you couldn't. Mm-hmm. All you could do was write with your offhand. And when you did wake up and started telling me that, it was probably still another 2 or 3 days before you finally got sharp enough to do it where it actually made sense to me, and I understand.
So days went by.
5 to 6 days after the event before you finally made me understand
what had happened.
What happened to you that you were aware of.
Yeah.
And
that I wasn't okay.
Yeah, and I just wanted to cry with you, but I mean, there was, at that point, there was nothing we could do. We just, this is our life, this is what we're doing today, and then we'll probably do it again tomorrow, and hopefully do it better.
I'll link in the description to that blog post if you want to read it. But the only issues I have now from that, obviously it's difficult to talk about, but I don't dwell on it. I don't have nightmares about it. I don't really even think about it all that much anymore. until I have to go have another surgery.
With that happening to you the way it did, and it being such an emergent situation, it was obviously nothing they could do to make it better for you. But it makes you wonder, who else has had this experience?
That's
how
what I
many
was just
people?
thinking.
How many people have had to endure that? And
Yeah.
there are people out there that understand. I mean, I can't. I didn't go through it, but I've seen you deal with it, and I would like to know how many others have. And that's a mouthful.
And not only that, but I think probably for me, just as traumatic as experiencing that is experiencing that and not being able to tell anybody what happened. And I don't know if this correlates with that, but I do remember in the ICU getting extremely frustrated about things, and my arm was paralyzed and I couldn't communicate, and so like a toddler I would kick my feet really hard at the end of the bed.
Having said that,
with a badly broken leg.
That actually set all of us off, because you had the tibial plateau fracture, and the first time you ever did that was early in the scenario when you had the external fixator and you had that leg kicking, and Stacy and Casper and I were doing everything we could to hold you down and stop that.
I just had a new memory.
Yeah, you can't do that.
I just had a new memory.
You did it several times, but
I just had a new memory of me kicking my legs, and I can picture Stacy at the foot of my bed with her glasses. Well, you just kick them legs, go.
Good.
Good. Did she do that? Did she stand at the foot of my bed like this?
You know, we were doing everything we could to keep you from doing that, because you could have caused extra damage. But given the severity of everything, your leg was the least of any of our worries.
Oh, yeah.
The fact that it was going up and down was great. We were all good with it.
Like Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump.
Yeah, you can kick them legs all you want to, but that's probably going to hurt later. But right now, we're glad they work.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was... You did that several times, and as stressful as it was cute watching you just kick him that way. That's all I can do, so I'm just going to throw me a little toddler fit.
In that moment, though, like, now I can sympathize more with how a toddler must feel, because they can't communicate effectively what the problem is, and out of sheer frustration, they throw a tantrum.
You're not listening to me, so watch this.
That's exactly what I did. Like, it... Light bulb moment.
Light bulb. So yeah, that was stressful, but in its own right, it was a good thing for everyone watching you, because if nothing else for me, I was getting to see you move everything. You might have been throwing a tantrum, you might have been madder than hell, but everything was working and you were using it to the very best of your ability, and it was... So
I threw a marker at him one time. I don't remember it, but he said I got mad and threw a
black
marker.
dot right there. So
what was I mad about?
I wasn't understanding what you were writing for the fourth time or fifth time, whatever it was, and
this is a good spot for this. My stepmom kept some of the papers that I would scribble on. One says not his fault. I was referring to my dad. If you saw the first video, you know that my dad was with me when the accident happened, and I was trying to write, you know, that it was not his fault. And then another time I wrote something about being in pain and no one listens. No one is listening. And then on another piece of paper, I was trying to ask my stepmom why she was crying. I remember seeing her on my right. I remember she was trying to turn away from me, and I could tell she was crying. And I remember laying there thinking, what's the matter with you? Like, why are you crying? Like I said earlier, the AOD is crazy enough, but to have 2 weeks later to have a late onset hydrocephalus from a traumatic injury is even more complicated. And
what might be worth mentioning is the hydrocephalus was caused because your spinal column was stretched to the point that your spinal cord actually pulled on your brain and seated it so deeply in your skull, according to your neurosurgeon, if I heard this correctly, that now that your brain is seated that deep in your skull, it occludes your natural CSF drains, and it allowed the pressure to build. And that's why you have the EVD today.
no, I have the VP shunt.
VP shunt, yes.
The EVD is a temporary drain to drain the extra fluid off, and they tried to remove it later, but I was still retaining fluid, so they ended up having to put in a permanent shunt. I have a shunt here, and there's a tube that runs from here behind my ear, down my neck, and into my stomach.
And if you sit this right, you can see your
Yeah,
tube.
you can see it right here.